Hello, good evening. Paul Lennon here. This is going to be tape 16 in the series of tapes commenting my autobiography, Life in the Legion of Christ, to put it very short. Originally called Our Father Maciel, who art in bed, an Ivan Sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. And greetings to you all as I speak to you from my humble studio here. This immediately follows all after tape 15, which was cut off. I hope there was no divine intervention there, cutting off my tape. I think I pressed a button here and everything just went blank. So talking, I'm going to excuse me. We're going to finish chapter 8, resisting here. It's a rather brief chapter in my memoir, and going to repeat a little bit, take up where I left off about disagreeing. This is an important point about how I handled, or how the Legion, or how Father Maciel handled some of my disagreements. And I want to say right off the bat, because I've been reading some of the feedback from the tapes, some people who disagree with me sharply, vehemently, whatever. And I just want to tell them that this is just a personal testimony, and as such is quite subjective. So I certainly am not infallible. I make mistakes. I've made mistakes. Um, just as the Legion has made mistakes, I've made mistakes. And I've taken false steps or steps in the wrong direction. So all of the above. I'm a very imperfect, very flawed person, and I'm aware of that, and also happily so, I think, because I have to trust God a lot more than if I were more perfect. Anyway, disagreeing. We had talking about this disagreement now in the School of Faith. I had a little bit of um, position here, a little bit of what we call power, little bit of power, just because I was the director, or whatever you would call it, of this new venture in the history of the Legion called the School of Faith. And I was proud that Nuestro Padre Maciel had chosen me. It was a work, a job that helped me feel better about myself, which increased my self-esteem, and which I greatly enjoyed. I felt realizado, as they say. What's the word? That I was kind of filling my potential in the School of Faith, at least part of it. I love teaching, as you can see. They can't shut me up. Anyway, I was disagreeing with Father Maciel because the original intention of the School of Faith, which I understood from him, unless I was interpreting already from the very beginning, was that this was very much a church dimension, kind of an apostolate. It was not strictly legionary. It was not strictly Regnum Christi, Kingdom of Christ thing. It has a church dimension, and this was really something that made me very happy. I think I was always looking for that more openness on the Legion's part, and this seemed to be the openness, the opening of a big door onto the church. And I was thinking, my goodness, as I said, diocese and parishes, helping helping others, and not keeping everything inside as the Legion tends to do. It's always concerned about itself, about its own progress, about making members, about making money, about being prestigious, about winning people over at the Vatican, about winning people over in politics, about always this kind of thing, very self-centered. And this was, I thought, was openness. So, but Paul was hearing rumblings in the distance about the School of Faith being used as an open means of recruitment. This is a phrase which existed in the Legion, may still. Se llama medio abierto de captación. Es decir, something that is put a work, an attractive apostolate, an attractive initiative, an attractive school, an attractive club, which is a means to engage people with the Legion of Christ and to become members, because very quickly they start recruiting you into the movement. As a layperson, you begin to take your first promises, etc., etc., etc. The Legion continues to do this with the senoritas and with the young men, with the generous, enthusiastic, idealistic, and somewhat protected senoritas in Mexico, in Spain, Ireland, and in Europe. South America, Venezuela, Brazil. The Legion has recruited all over a lot of the Catholic world and has recruited a lot of these youngish young women. Sometimes they start off at 15 years of age, being groomed for to take their promises at 17 or 18 years of age, which are similar to the religious vows. To get Catholics to join the Legion's Regnum Christi kingdom. To him, this meant a narrowing of the initial focus and a twisting of its mission. Paul is getting a little bit testy here, shall we say. He expressed his misgivings to the powers that be, but the objection fell on deaf ears. Once more he felt restless and began unconsciously wanting to take some control, starting to criticize internally, brooding maybe. Perhaps he had never adjusted properly to the introduction of this new religious movement into the Catholic Church and into the Legion of Christ. Not on his horizon from the beginning, perhaps until the decade after he joined the Legion, 60s and 70s. Now this lay section was supposedly more important than the priestly branch, the latter being absorbed into the greater whole. And these words in 2008 have become prophetic. So please allow me a moment of prophetism, because now I'm talking about the priestly branch being absorbed into the lay branch, into the movement, into the Regnum Christi, and now very, very recently, the Legion has wanted to bring everything under the umbrella of Regnum Christi, of Legion, of Kingdom of Christ. There's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 sections, whichever there are in the work of Father Maciel, and now they're under the big umbrella of Regnum Christi Federation, Federación Regnum Christi, the Federation of the Kingdom of Christ. Paul's generation had seen the movement evolve from vague ideas to, I was in Rome when Maciel was mulling over how to start this thing, and I think he wanted to emulate the Opus Dei of Monsignor Escrivá. And so the Regnum, to my humble opinion, is somewhat of a take on the Opus Dei, which is perhaps more famous and more well-known and perhaps a little deeper. Forgive me, they're going to really sue me after this. A little deeper, a little bit more serious, a little more scientific than the Regnum Christi. The Regnum Christi has Maciel's charism of being very attractive and knowing how to get people, knowing how to bring the people in gently in that suave way. But according to Paul's values, that should not justify its being placed above the School of Faith, should not justify the School of Faith being placed above local dioceses and parishes, or to interfere with the original universal nature of the School of Faith. Anyway, at that particular time, Paul's professional moon waxed during that period, 76 to 82, together with his self-assurance and self-determination. His allegiance to Father Maciel and the Legion began to wane, perhaps in proportion, and prompted by a series of disagreements. By the end of 1979, he was now 36. Paul was less hungry emotionally and less insecure due to his success as the founder, creator, and director of the School of Faith. His apostolate with a bright future to other parts of central and northern Mexico. From his superior's point of view, Paul is losing perhaps humility, docility, spirit of faith, spiritual point of view, and integration, this being inserted more strongly into the Legion of Christ, being grafted more into the tree of the Legion. And he is becoming increasingly worldly. On his long drives from Tlalpan, where he had to stay, he stayed on the other side of Mexico City, he had to travel to the School of Faith every day. I don't know why. At the beginning, at least, long trips all through Mexico City in his little brown, dung-colored Renault that was given to him by his benefactors. He was becoming more worldly because he was turning on the radio on his little Renault and picking up the English language FM station. He is able to reconnect with some of his old favorites of the 50s and 60s and becomes a John Denver fan, singing along with him on those nasty and noisy Mexican streets. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country roads, a big John Denver fan. I was always a fan of somebody, very enthusiastic about my favorite singers at this particular time. No idea where Virginia was, anywhere, or the Mountain Mama, or what was going on there. Maybe this, anyway, was some kind of chicken soup for the soul. One of the more enlightened ladies of Lomas brought him a Stevie Wonder record for his birthday in an effort to bring him a little bit more up to date and to broaden his horizons, musically speaking. Lovely lady, thank you again. You know who you are. Take a walk. This is called Take a Walk, the last paragraph here. And this is kind of exciting. I hope you like this part. I am getting excited myself. In the spring of 1980, in 1980, 4 years in the School of Faith, um, things have taken off very well. We're expanding, we're growing, uh, we're making a little bit of money. I think we charge for the classes a small fee. We're being self-supporting, whatever Father Maciel wants. And I love teaching and a lot of admirers, I suppose. Anyway, in the spring of 1980, according to my memoir, suddenly, that's one of the key words in the memoir and in the Legion of Christ, suddenly, de repente, without notice, Nuestro Padre Maciel sent a fellow legionary from Rome to replace Paul overnight at the School of Faith, just like that. It was a rather sheepish Father Peter Cronin, who I talk about in my memoir and who passed away prematurely in 1999. God rest his soul. Thank you again for such a wonderful friend and confrere. He was kind of sheepish when he mounted a flight of stairs in Sierra Vertientes 605 and stepped awkwardly into the office. Padre Paul, I don't know whether he's speaking in English or Spanish, maybe in Spanish, I'm taking over the School of Faith. Could you tell me how to run it as quickly as you can? Swiftly retreating to the top floor, that was my little refuge. There was another floor up there where we had the bookstore, storage area too. Retreating to the floor above, Paul took a moment to get his bearings. He was being told to take a walk. The reason given was that he was urgently needed, another famous word, urgent, needed in Cozumel, Quintana Roo. And by the way, this is, people are going to say Quintana Roo. That's okay. I know when you get your ticket, you'll probably just say Cancun, Mexico. But if we're being precise, it's Quintana Roo. And so he was being told to hightail it back to Quintana Roo, where he'd been before. A tourist destination, but also mission land, to accompany, another key word, a friend of the Legion, Cardinal Eduardo Pironio, an Italian cardinal who was going, to Cozumel to relax. Pironio was prefect of the Sacred Congregation for Religious and Secular Institutes and a friend of the Legion. So he was in charge of all the religious orders. And naturally, Father Maciel was cultivating him. So he was being showered by the Legion with attention, special favors, gifts, maybe, and now being offered a vacation in Cozumel, lovely island of Cozumel. He was 1965, perhaps, maybe, or later. He was instrumental in securing Vatican approval for the Legion constitutions and also for the kind of like the very high approval for the Legion at the Vatican called Decretum Laudis, the decree of praise given to certain congregations and orders when they had met certain standards and were uh, given this honor, shall we say. It's almost like I'm imagining it like it's being knighted by the Vatican. You're making the grade now with this decree. Paul took a plane the next day. It's like, you're leaving, here's your ticket. When he arrived in Cozumel, he found out that someone else was already taking care of Cardinal Pironio, and I was not one of those, you know, good companions for the hierarchy or the high aristocracy, shall we say. You know, still very much a Dubliner, maybe. And he wasn't too, didn't like hanging out with the big shots, shall we say. Paul was relieved anyway, as chaperoning church dignitaries or telling pious anecdotes, not good at telling jokes and funny stories, and fawning were not his forte. The local legionary superior, Father Javier Orozco, rest in peace, was kind but didn't need Paul. Apparently, Paul was never needed in Cozumel. It was a ruse to get him away from the school of faith. After a short rest in Cozumel, which included a bicycle ride around the island in the burning sun, the acting directorial, uh, excuse me, territorial director, now Father Carlos Sancajo, a lovely Spanish priest, been made territorial director, uh, made Paul come back to Mexico City, where he would return to the school of faith. Now, just a little parenthesis here, almost finished. Father Carlos, who was one of the most spiritual legionaries that I've ever known, um, he had been made territorial director, that is provincial, after Father Alfonso, who had advised me at the beginning of the School of Faith, had fallen from grace. He made the big mistake of standing up to Father Maciel once in public at one of our retreats in Tlalpan, Centro Cultural Interamericano, Inter-American Cultural Center in Tlalpan, Mexico. And he had dared to stand up and disagree with Father Maciel, and he was taken out of there, kicked out of there ASAP, and recluded in another uh, in another house, another Legion house with older legionary priests. The house of the older fathers. Father Cronin was sent packing to Monterrey, Mexico. First move out of there, Monterrey, Mexico, and thence to Rome. One wonders why Father Maciel would not simply tell Paul what he wanted him to do, or just to leave. There's all these subterfuges and all these strange manipulations and things that used to go on, excuse me. The episode reveals Father Maciel choosing one particular tactic from his ample repertoire of manipulation to rock Paul and dislodge him from the school of faith. And maybe to be careful. Little warnings. Uh, what would they be called? Veiled threats. You get that a lot too. Tell me if I'm wrong. Hasta la vista. Please take care of yourselves. Let us continue to pray, those of us who are prayers, and hope that we stabilize the virus in especially in the bigger countries and larger countries, and especially in the United States of America, which is suffering tremendously as I speak. God bless America, and God have mercy on America as we speak. Take care.